everyone, and thanks for joining me for this special video episode for the last issue of the Pharma Navigator in 2025. My name is Felicity Thomas, and I'm the Associate Director of Editorial Content for the Pharma Navigator, and I will be the host for this episode where I chat with several subject matter experts on the topic of drug delivery services. First up, I'm joined by Charles Evans, Senior Vice President of Pharmaceutical Development, and John Len, Chief Scientific Officer, both from MedPharm. In our chat, Charles, John and I discussed the evolution and key trends shaping drug delivery services, as well as the design principles and scientific approaches that can help to de-risk development. Thanks very much for joining me today, Charles and John. It's great to have you both on. Could you, first of all, please introduce yourselves and provide us with a little bit of background into your current roles and industry experience?
So my name is Charles Evans, Senior Vice President of Pharmaceutical Development at MedPharm. Been in the industry around 20 years, worked extensively on different formulation strategies across multiple dosage forms and therapeutic areas, and a real balance on focusing on scientific rigor, patient usability, and also regulatory compliance, involved in leading development programs from early stage concept through clinical supply and beyond. Also did my PhD whilst working at MedPharm on a novel film forming spray formulation for the treatment of athlete's foot.
John?
Hi, everyone. My name is John Lynn. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at MedPharm. I've been in this space for about 23 years. I spent the majority of my career in pharmaceutical in early drug development all the way through late stage, where I was fortunate enough to be part of 9 product approvals. During that time, the majority of that focus was on topicals for dermatology. And then I spent the last 10 years here at the CDMO, still specializing on topical and transdermals, but expanding outside of skin into other epithelium, things like nasal delivery to the front of the eye, other mucosal membranes. Early on my career, my PhD is in pharmaceutics, where I was really interested in the counterintuitive delivery of macromolecules, especially to skin. So skin has sort of evolved to keep things out. There are a few larger compounds that we have seen that can get in skin. So this helps kind of the development of large molecules were outside of kind of the traditional small molecules. I'd say in the last 10 years, I've been really focused on more advanced models to be used in the different epithelium to help sort of de-risk these programs prior to going to the clinic.
So how have the drug delivery services evolved over recent years, do you think? Have there been any key trends that you can highlight that have shaped the sector? Charles, I'll throw this one over to you to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, there was CROs, contract research organizations, and then CMOs, which were focused on later stage scale up and manufacturing, whereas the CROs handled the kind of more early stage formulation design and any in vitro ex vivo models that go around, and that still exists, but there has been a growing trend where that model has shifted to more integrated partnerships, which keep things at kind of a one-stop shop and in-house, and that reduces, tech transfer risks, can help accelerate timelines. And also when there's an increase in complexity and kind of for these more niche areas, being able to keep things in one-stop shops and taking it the whole way through reduces the risk. I think it's very important to point out that only really works when CDMOs truly have development experience and not just manufacturing, especially when you're looking at the more complex routes. And I think there's some key questions that should be asked when you're speaking to CDMOs to get a real understanding of whether they truly understand that early stage development. The original kind of CMOs were very focused on manufacturing, getting a product in, scaling it up, and not really optimizing it for delivery of the drug and ensuring, shelf life stability and things like that. Skipping that formulation development phase is definitely a false economy. You can run into issues later on in the development cycle, when you get to clinical studies and have things like false negatives, because with these more complex delivery routes, the formulation plays a critical role in delivering the drug, very different to kind of tablets and things like that.
John?
Yeah, I think Charlie makes a really good point. I think there's an underappreciation of what it means to be a topical as a medicine, and really it's the compound in a vehicle. I think a lot of people there's an underappreciation to the complexity of that, and I think there's a desire to have speed over price. And when you shortcut that process and you skip out what Charlie's referring to as that pre-formulation side, you don't really have that foundation or that baseline information on your formulation. There's this false sense that you can potentially get to the clinic faster, which maybe you can. But we've seen a lot of clients start to fail on the formulation side, even in the clinic, which is not the phase of development that you want to start seeing these issues. And then if you have skipped that sort of critical early phase, that basic understanding of physical and chemical stability of the compound in these relatively complex formulations, you don't have any data to go back to. So you're troubleshooting and backfilling at the same time, which then can lead into additional studies on the safety side. And then you have to get into this complex discussion of how you bridge it and how you don't bridge it. We see enough of those that we actually call them rescue programs, and our heart goes out to these clients that have sort of skipped that phase and they're trying to troubleshoot it, and it's not where you want it, and that makes investors nervous. It makes the internal investors nervous, and then there's just lots of questions about what happened and why are you doing that. And to be honest with you, I think there are quite a few places that have skipped this, and it's done a disservice to topical dermatology in general, where you've seen these failures and you've got a lot of investment being done, and then they try to get into the clinic and they're starting to fail. And that spooked a lot of investors. And so what they're getting into is there's a hesitance or reluctance to get into this market. And that's purely simply you've just skipped the basic science. So I couldn't say it enough that to really just spend the extra time, your overall timeline will be shorter when you do it, and troubleshooting will be easier. You're still going to have some troubleshooting. I'd say that the majority of your problems are going to be on the formulation side. I know we have some really good sort of models, exotic models, where you can look at delivery and activity, but really you've got to spend that upfront time and understanding the compound and its interaction with these different excipients.
You've already broached this topic somewhat, but maybe you can provide our viewers with a little bit more information on the increasingly active or strategic role that CDMOs are playing in development. John, do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, I would. The other thing I would add is that I think there has been from the regulatory agencies a shift away from animal models, which means they're putting a little more focus or interest on preclinical models that don't use animals or animal tissue. That's something that our teams have been spending a lot of time on. I'd also say that what we're seeing is the submissions that they are now requiring and wanting are having more focus on the quality of the product. So some of that basic understanding, just having it even in your submission, they have an appreciation for that. And any of these preclinical models that you can do to de-risk it, that they're not required, but they certainly appreciate that extra information, especially on new chemical entities where the pharmacology is less known, and there's a little bit less known on the clinical side. So having all that information together in a more robust regulatory submission, the agencies certainly appreciate that, which can make your whole potentially approval process a lot easier.
And Charles?
I think the only thing is really, as I alluded to earlier, is doing due diligence on whether that CDMO really knows that early stage. If are they talking about, optimizing the formulation for, delivery, for the delivery route, for the indication, or are they really talking about, manufacturing timelines, scale up, and not considering kind of basic pharmaceutics?
Patient centricity has been an important aspect of drug development and delivery for some time now. Keeping that in mind, how can CDMOs help innovators to incorporate more patient-centric design principles into their drug delivery? John, shall we stay with you for this one?
Sure, I'll start. This is the way I patient centric, I think is maybe an AI term. The way that I sort of define that term is more cosmetic elegance. And so the patient needs to want to use the product, especially when it comes to topicals. And so patient compliance has always been a pretty big issue. And if you think about it, there's an interaction with the product that occurs, especially when it's more of a chronic condition where you're having to potentially do something daily over long periods of time. You're going to want to have to use that. And that's where this cosmetic elegance needs to come into play. And finding companies or CDMOs that know how to balance that cosmetic elegance with the pharmaceutics. Cosmetics have the advantage where they can work with a lot more excipients potentially that are not approved. When it comes to the pharmaceutic space, one of the things that you want to do is to try to build in some of that cosmetic elegance without adding the complexities of using potentially excipients that are not approved. You also have to define each one of those excipients with some sort of rationale. So the more you add in there, so it's a little bit of a balance, but I would say that, building that into a potential product that the patient likes and can adhere to will de-risk that program later on, assuming you get product approval, and then the patient will actually end up using it, which then will ultimately translate to a better sales.
Charles?
Yeah, and I think that this is something that I've always stood by. You need to consider the patient, you need to consider the drug, the delivery route, the indication, and the regulatory risk, as well as later stage commercial aspects. So it's important to outline your target product profile early and then as you design your work to get an understanding of, you know, how how easy it is to hit all those things in the target product profile. Are there some which are mandatory? Are there some which are nice to have? And also then leveraging any performance models early on to get an understanding of, you know, what what formulation excipients you need to achieve not only cosmetic appeal but also delivery. And the other thing to consider as well is, skin is one thing, but if you're applying topically to the eye or anything like that, you need to consider the packaging and how that's going to be applied. And then you're looking at patient usability as well as cosmetic appeal. So I think everything kind of comes together, and you need to consider all aspects, not just cosmetic appeal, but it comes back down to basics and picking up all those different things and looking ahead and de-risking the whole development with it.
Yeah, I think that's where, Charlie talking about that target product profile. Even just trying to fill in as many of the dots that you can in the beginning phase. We know that you certainly aren't going to be able to populate the entire TPP in the early phases, but as many of those questions that you can answer in the beginning really helps the formulators guide them in what you want. A lot of that is patient preference, disease, routes of delivery, all that need to be baked in earlier. And the better that you understand that, you'll be more successful in the long run.
Yeah, and I think, you may have a target product profile that says you'd like a cream, but if you've got a drug for topical delivery across the skin, is likely not soluble in water, and then that limits the amount of drug you can get within a cream formulation. And you may have to move to other dosage forms to get to the delivery you need. And then it's kind of a risk versus benefit and taking into consideration the disease and what's preferred.
Yeah, we see that a lot that, they come in with TPP with like, this is what we want. Try not to get too emotionally attached to certain types of vehicles. Be open and be data driven. That's the other thing that we've seen recently is that people tend to hold on to what they want versus what the data is telling us. I think there are some CDMOs out there that will generate some really good data packages, but be patient. Let the data come in, put it all together, and so that includes all the formulation stuff, any of the models. Certainly we develop sort of these decision matrices, which can have a lot of information in it, and we do see some people being a bit impatient, trying to rush it. But I say, every model has its limitations, but when you put it all together, you get a much better decision matrix or ability to decide on that formulation to progress.
I want to focus on topical and transdermal routes of delivery. What are the most rigorous scientific approaches that you can use to assess long-term excipient compatibility during formulation development and stability testing? Charles, I'll start with you on this one, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is underlined firstly by your analytical method, and you need to ensure that you've got an analytical method that you trust. A stability indicating method. So typically you do force degradation to confirm that you can see impurity peaks, you can see a change in drug content. And it doesn't have to be a perfect method at this stage, but it needs to be fit for purpose for what we call the pre-formulation phase. And you would tailor that force degradation based on the drug. So for, small molecules, you look at the classic heat acid base oxidation. You may look at other things for larger molecules. And then that analytical method development evolves alongside the formulation development. The drug excipient stability, which you asked about, that is firstly selecting excipients, and that's based on the target product profile. So you would select excipients that are suitable for the delivery route, suitable for the indication, and then you would put together an approach. Typically, you start with solubility, and that's where you get an understanding of what's a solvent for the drug, what's a non-solvent, and that's the cornerstone for being able to know whether the target concentration can be achieved, or what concentration can be achieved in the different formulation types, but also being able to optimize any formulations moving forward for drug release. And then once you have that solubility, that will enable you to design your drug excipient stability. So for things which are non-solvents, for example, and the drug's not soluble, and you probably want to look at that in binary systems. Or even more a wider range of systems with more excipients within. And then that excipient stability study is set up with the different excipients, typically over either a 1 to 2 week or a 2 and 4 week time period, depending on how quickly you want to move. And then you'd look at that at accelerated conditions and real-time conditions with a low drug to excipient ratio to really kind of accelerate that degradation. And what you're trying to look for there is problematic excipients long term. And you need to interpret that data carefully within the context of the drug and the final product. So, some excipients you may only use at a very low percentage within a final formulation. So if you get some level of degradation with that in the pure excipient, it may not be as much of an issue, but that alongside any force degradation data to understand the routes of degradation of the drug will help you design the systems moving forward to, what kind of stabilizers you'd have in there. Do you need to control pH for stability, antioxidants for drugs that are prone to oxidation? And that kind of forms then the basis for developing formulations. And you're essentially screening out excipients for the next stage. It's not necessarily going to give you a long-term excipient compatibility because you're looking at it over a small time period, but it's going to give you an indication of what excipients are the risks and what way you can stabilize the drug in the product.
Yeah, what Charlie's explaining the right way to do things. I think if I flip it over and say the wrong way to do things, I think there's a lot of people that have this notion that you can work with these base formulations. So you have sort of a chassis and you put your drug in there. All the things that Charlie just explained are mostly skipped with that exercise, which means you don't have an understanding what's happening there. And then potentially that you don't know if that drug is in solution or in suspension. So imagine if you have drug that's in solution and then you have drug that's in suspension, you effectively have two products that you're going to have to monitor that are thermodynamically unstable and changing over time. And so you can imagine that if you're trying to go out a couple years with something like that, you're going to run into issues. There are products out there that got approved and they start to form crystals. That's likely not having done sort of that base homework in the early phases. That's a that's a pretty serious issue to be dealing with. But again, this I just want to say with almost certainty, if you go with this approach of going into a base or chassis type of formulation, it's highly unlikely it'll be a product. And if it is a product, you're going to be spending a lot of time on the background trying to backfill or mitigate issues that start occurring as the product ages.
Finally, then, we've chatted a lot about the importance of de-risking development to ensure success. So could you both maybe provide some insights into the benefits of in vitro or ex vivo models in de-risking the development of transdermal and topical drugs?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start that and then let Charlie backfill the spaces that I missed. But I think I think you have an advantage when you start talking about topicals and transdermal because you have potentially direct access to the organ that you're trying to treat. In the case of, say, skin, for example, there are cosmetic surgeries that you can use, and you can take that tissue and keep it alive. For other areas like the inside of the nose or inside of the mouth, you can take human primary cells and you can reconstruct that tissue, and so you can start working with living constructs. And I sort of break out those in vitro, ex vivo models into kind of three main categories. There are some early models just looking at release of the compound from the formulation. Those are sort of IVRT, so in vitro release, or similar to dissolution. That'll give you some idea in the early phases if you're trapping the drug in there. And so you need to get the drug out of the formulation. You can use those across the different routes of delivery. I'd say they're probably better placed later stage, more when you're looking at sameness and you're looking at product quality. Then you start thinking, I've got to get the compound into the tissue. And so these are delivery models that look at penetration permeation. And then I think it's really key to stay away from animal tissue, stay away from frozen tissue. What we've seen, there are some animal models that claim they are closer to human, but just think of it as a general species that they are close but not the same. So I would avoid those unless you have some sort of safety question that you want to answer. Stick with human tissue. Avoid using frozen and thawed skin or tissue as much as you can, so you can get some tissues from cadavers. What ends up happening is when you go through that freeze thaw cycle, you can damage those tight junctions, and so the tissue effectively will become leaky. And we've seen that with some experiments that we've compared nasal tissue that we've gotten from cadavers versus reconstructed tissue where it's a living construct. And you get an answer, but it's a false answer. And we've seen that sometimes the formulation that you select is the wrong one. So it's really critical to understand those models. Those models also have a limit of they're just looking at delivery. So I think it's really key to if you can, to get some understanding on the pharmacology. The big limitation to those delivery models is you're sort of extracting the compound out of the tissue. You don't know if it's bioavailable and able to engage that target, and that's really critical. So you can have drug that's in the tissue, and it may be bound. It may be locked up. It may be higher up in the tissue than you understand. That's a limitation of those models. That those pharmacology models where you're using living constructs can help you understand that compound is now being delivered and able to hit that target. When you sort of put those models all together, each one of them are going to have a limitation. So the more complex your drug is, the more complex your target is, it's better to put these models together. Each one of them has a limitation. And people need to be honest with themselves. There's no perfect model out there that will answer preclinically what you're going to see in the clinic. What you want to do is de-risk that formulation from a release, from a delivery, and then from an activity, put all that together so that potentially when you do get into the clinic and you may have a clinical failure, you can look back and say, okay, it was the target and not something I did on the formulation. So, putting that formulation together, making sure that you've done all the key critical steps on the pre-formulation side, and then running it through those in vitro models. The more in vitro models that you have, the better you're able to de-risk that prior to the clinic. So you don't have that sick feeling with a clinical failure of, oh, I didn't optimize the formulation for release or for delivery, or, oh, it's just bound up. We have seen some of these compounds actually irreversibly bound to the tissue. Bioavailability is a product of, potentially target, but also of tissue binding, protein binding. You can answer that question when you put these models together, and so that you don't have that sinking feeling of I missed something after you spend a lot of time and money.
Charles, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think John covered a lot of it. I, with these models, I think the other thing they're critical for is, de-risking your wallet by essentially understanding what excipients are playing a role, how they're helping to deliver the drug, and using that data to then support generation of IP. We are generating a lot of IP for our clients, and typically that is either from stability, understanding, it's excipients and how they play a role with stability, solubility that you wouldn't expect, or drug delivery or release or target engagement that would be unexpected to someone of ordinary skill in the art. So, I think it's multifaceted. It's helping to de-risk going into the clinic, but also helping to support in terms of IP generation.
That becomes critical because you have a lot of people trying to repurpose compounds, and so that IP becomes really critical. I'd say that going to a place that has a lot of experience in generating that IP can obviously be very, very beneficial as you're trying to protect that product in later stages.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
In this second interview, I sit down with Ian Simpson, who is the director of the Global Pharma Segment team at Phillips Medisize. Ian and I talk about drug delivery device technologies in more detail and how considering these early on in the development process will help to ensure success. So thank you very much for joining me today, Ian. It's great to have you on to talk about drug delivery services. Could you first of all introduce yourself and give our viewers a little bit of background into your current role and your industry experience?
Sure, thanks. Well, thanks, Felicity, for having me. So I'm Ian Simpson. I work within the commercial pharma segment team at Phillips Medisize. So we're the commercial part of the organization. We're the main interface between our customers and then our capabilities, whether that's in development or in manufacturing work. In terms of my background, I've worked for most of the past 25 years in various aspects of drug delivery. I spent a long time working in technology consultancy in a variety of roles around product strategy, project management, and also business development. I've been at Phillips Medisize for 7 years, and in that time I started in early product development, developing some particularly customer-specific solutions, particularly around electromechanical devices, and also looking at connected health. And then moved into a platform group. We'll talk a bit about platforms, I think, later on. And then the last 3 years, I've been in the commercial pharma segment team. I've got a degree and PhD in physics, but that's from a long time ago. But hopefully still relevant to some extent. Yeah.
That's great. So drawing upon your industry experience then, when a client comes and approaches you with an NCE and an intended delivery route, what is the most critical factor, in the initial design strategy for that project, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's an order of things. First of all, is understanding why that delivery route is being chosen. First and foremost, it comes down to the properties of the drug, whether this is something that's going to be destroyed in the gut, so therefore it can't be an oral tablet, whether it's targeting the lung, so therefore it might be inhaled, or whether it's a systemic delivery, so it might be injected. So that tends to be the first thing to consider is, what's driving that from a sort of, pharma PKP PD point of view. I think then beyond that, then of course, if you're starting to look at a route that requires a delivery device, which is where my expertise fits and where Phillips Medisize works, then you're starting to get into specifics around, what are the requirements for that device? If it's an injection device, what's the volume of drug that's being delivered? How quick does it need to be administered? Is it a bolus injection or a continuous delivery of some form? And then obviously that will then start to drive the choice of device type. That then takes you into the idea, the point about patient centricity. If you're looking for a delivery system which is going to be, say, used for home use for a patient, you obviously want to consider what works for the patient. Is that something they can use, with relatively low burden in a home environment? Are they going to administer themselves, or is a caregiver going to give that for them? And then I think the last point would be, well, what's the business case around it? Is the solution affordable in terms of the cost of the medicine? Is the pharma company trying to differentiate from other similar products? But in reality, all those things are intertwined. I think a key thing that the pharma industry has learned is think about your delivery system early. Don't develop your drug and then decide how you're then going to deliver it and what device you need to have. Start thinking early about the delivery options, your business requirements around that, and then you're going to iterate between those points that I've just made.
Yeah, so I want to ask you as well about the potential use of pre-vetted platforms in order to help, reduce the risk around those development projects and, help to accelerate, which is something that everybody wants now. Let's get everything to market as quickly as possible. So how do they help, do you think, for clients?
Yeah, I mean, they very much help for the reasons that you sort of, implied in what you've just said. Obviously, when you develop a new device, there's going to be time and risk and cost associated with that. I mean, both, from a technical point of view, but also from a regulatory point of view. Even if you've developed something, it's still got to get past the regulators. And we've seen quite a lot of, devices in the past fail, for reasons that weren't expected in terms of regulatory review. So there's no doubt from a risk perspective, the use of a platform that's already been developed and approved for other medicines is advantageous. I mean, to go beyond that, I mean, for a specific pharma company, of course, if they've got experience of that device, that's also helpful for them. They can draw upon the experience of that device if it's a third-party device, having been approved by other companies and other medicines. But obviously, building in-house experience is also important. And we see a lot with pharma companies that they will look at device technologies relatively early. If they think they're a platform solution, they'll do some testing before they actually think about putting a molecule in there. So they're building confidence that they have the right drug delivery tools in their box to be able to support the medicines that they are going to need to deliver in the future. And that's the challenge. I think the challenge is that, requirements for drug delivery are changing all the time. There's uncertainties there around the volume or the viscosity of the drug. So you want to try and do some pre-work so you don't have a problem suddenly that you find that the devices are no longer suitable for the way your formulations ended up. So I think we're seeing a lot more early consideration, both in terms of aligning devices with formulation, but also doing some testing work to support that.
You mentioned there about viscosity. We're seeing higher viscosities, particularly around the complex biologics that are coming into the development pipeline. There's obviously challenges there associated with their delivery. So what technical trade-offs need to be managed during the design process for such complex drug products in order to ensure success?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I would say that that's going to be something that's going to shape the self-administration market, particularly for biologics, over the next 5 to 10 years. So yes, you're right about biologics becoming more dominant, but the other thing that's also happening around that, it seems that dose sizes are going up. Some of that may just be to do with the pharmaceutical aspects of the drug, but also there's a desire to reduce patient burden by having less frequent administration. So therefore the doses are getting less frequent and therefore bigger in size. That then gives you a dilemma. You either have to go, in order to increase the dose, you're going to either have to go up in volume or potentially go up in concentration. If you go up in volume, eventually you'll get to a point that you can't use an auto-injector, which limits probably 3, maybe 5 ml. Beyond that, in terms of volume, there's too much drug to deliver in one shot. You're going to have to infuse that more slowly. And that takes you down the route of sort of large volume devices, these wearable pump technologies that are coming to market. But if you want to stay within the auto-injector space, which is obviously a well-trodden and well-proven market, you're then obviously going up in concentration. Going up in concentration will typically mean going up in viscosity. Going up in viscosity will mean two challenges in terms of drug delivery, which is where our expertise fits. That's going to require higher delivery forces. It's going to require technology that is able to support those higher injection forces. And that's where electromechanical technology, for instance, which we've been working on, might be a really good way forward. There are additional challenges. If you're working with more viscous drugs, then there are challenges around processing and filling, filling of the syringes that will go into the devices. Just general processing of the formulation creates other challenges as well. So it requires quite a radical change, both in the preparation and delivery of those drugs. But the benefit is it might allow you to stay with an existing device format, which has been well proven over the last 20 years in terms of self-injection.
Yeah, you're discussing it, the self-administration. Obviously, that's very important to reduce patient burden, means they don't have to go into the hospital all the time, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing like the connected devices, gaining popularity. So in light of that, how does the integration of digital feedback impact the human factors engineering strategy for the self-administration devices?
Yeah, I mean, that's another great question. I mean, if you look at the world that we live in today, we're increasingly impacted by the use of digital services, particularly around the use of smartphones. And of course, that interest is coming into the world of drug delivery as well. But of course, it presents some challenges that maybe we'll come on to, as well as some opportunities. But from an opportunity point of view, it obviously allows you to expand considerably the amount of support you can give to a patient, alongside the use of their device. So if you provide a companion app, it can provide, training and feedback. It could obviously provide access maybe to a community of other patients, so people can, share their experiences about their disease and their treatment. So it opens up many possibilities. And we've done quite a lot of work looking at the use of companion digital services to provide that level of support, and particularly around looking at non-adherence, where people are struggling to use their medicines, for all sorts of reasons, and how can we better support that? So the idea of connecting a device into a digital service can do a number of things. I mean, it can provide the patient with direct feedback and training and support, guidance. It can motivate them perhaps to take their medicine when they're struggling with that for whatever reason. And it can also share that information with other people, whether that's a caregiver, whether it's a healthcare professional, and provide a much more supportive environment to support the correct use of medicine and the management of the diseases. So it has many benefits. The challenges, I would say, in it are, first of all, a lot of obviously correct use is a behavioral issue. Sometimes it's people just don't have the information to support their treatment, but other times they may be in denial about the disease, they may be worried about the side effects of the drug. So the point is, if you have a connected device, that when the person has taken their medicine or not, and then you can provide more tailored services to support that. So we've done some work looking at the role of behavioral change management, looking at the things that determine why people may or may not be adherent to the treatments for a disease, and then providing timely feedback, whether that's through an app or whether that's through a patient support program, for instance, to really target the right feedback at the right time in terms of the patient's progress. And just to answer your question then about the human factors side of it, of course, the challenge from a human factors point of view is we see that again in our everyday world. We get very intolerant of digital services that are not well designed, they're a bit clunky, a bit hard to use. I think it raises the bar in terms of the amount of human factors work and the approach that's required to support that. And I think particularly what's interesting within the combination product development world is, if you look at a device, I mean, most devices are relatively simple, and therefore you can iterate in a relatively small number of cycles to improve the usability. We know the basic concepts, right, whether it's an injection pen or an auto injector, but maybe the forces are not quite right on the actuation button, where you can adjust those things based upon patient feedback. But when you're looking at a digital service, you need much more rapid turnaround. You need much more agile development, because if the digital service is not right and you're trying to get feedback on it, people will focus on the things that are the basic things, that the screen's not clear or the colors are not right or whatever, rather than the things you're trying to understand is whether it can help them treat their disease better. So it adds complication, but there's a lot we can draw from, obviously, with a lot of experience of very good digital services, in the sort of consumer world, we can draw upon that expertise, and we can bring that obviously into the medicine environment to help develop the right sort of solutions that are also aligned with our experience more broadly around digital services.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously, I'd be amiss to not broach regulatory, considerations. Obviously, very important within our industry. So, could you discuss the regulatory landscape, within your field for us, please, and provide some best practices for companies to be able to navigate that landscape successfully?
Yes, of course. Well, if we focus to start with, just let's talk a bit, continue the discussion about connectivity, because that's one of the challenges, I would say, around digital services. Whereas digital services are very pervasive in our ordinary lives, they typically don't come with the same level of regulatory scrutiny. Sure, in a financial services, an app needs to be secure, so you still have issues around cybersecurity and fraud and those sorts of things. But within the world of medicines, there are other regulatory considerations. Obviously, it's really important the person takes their dose correctly, and we don't want to impact that in an adverse sort of way. So inevitably, there's a much higher burden around regulation. And I think the challenge is, if you look at drug delivery, you've already got a medicine, which is where the pharma company sees most of the value, that has to go through a regulatory approval pathway. You're now introducing a device that also adds, some additional regulatory constraints around, how that's approved. And now, if you're looking at digital service, the chances are the digital service is providing anything which is, about the medicine and the use of the medicine, it'll also be regulated. There are some things you can probably provide reminders. That's probably a low level of regulation typically. But if you're providing feedback around injection sites, for instance, or, around dose logging, or anything to do with that might impact your dose, then the regulation gets higher. So the challenge for pharma companies is yet more burden when they're trying to get medicines to market. And the other side, whereas I think there's reasonable evidence that digital services can work and provide positive feedback, it's quite difficult to show that at scale, and it's quite difficult to build the evidence to get that reimbursed. So there's some quite strong headwinds, you could say, in terms of why people might struggle to adopt digital services within their combination products, that really sometimes cancel out the attractiveness. And I think there's a lot we can do at an industry level to try and understand those headwinds better, and how we can lower the burden and also establish the benefit of those companion digital services. And looking more broadly, around Europe in particular, I mean, the whole arrival of MDR, the transition from MDD, has created a lot of complexity and a lot of uncertainty. The regulations need to be interpreted in the right way. There's a lack of clarity. There's a lack of support within the system at the moment as these new things come through. And certainly MDR has increased the burden on digital services because of the risks they could potentially present. So, that it also presents a bit of a barrier at the moment, at least until we can understand our way through all that. But again, there's some great work going on, within the industry collaborative groups that are exploring what those barriers are and how we can best address those at an industry level to make it easier then on an individual product level to get those things developed and approved.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us, Ian. It's been really wonderful speaking with you today.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks again to the experts who joined me for this special video episode, Charles Evans, John Len and Ian Simpson, for providing us with their valuable insights and expertise on the topic of drug delivery services. Keep checking out the Pharma Navigator's website at thepharmanavigator.com for the latest news and views from the biopharma industry. We'll also be developing a host of exciting multimedia content in 2026 for you to enjoy. Until then, have a wonderful festive break and a very happy new year.